taking the teacher training made me recognize that there's so much necessity, opportunity, and it's almost my imperative to go out and teach yoga as a Latina, as a woman, as a fuller-bodied teacher, as a teacher that comes from background that isn't of the norm of who has access to yoga these days.
Welcome back to Full-Time Yoga Teacher Podcast. My name is Reika and I am your host. I am recording this intro from Moyobamba, Peru. I have started teaching a teacher training program here maybe 5 or 6 days ago, and it is going well. I am noticing that I am constantly sweating because of humidity, and I am constantly getting bit by mosquitoes. Those are my two update for you. But teaching teacher training has been great. Since this is my first training of the 4 month, I am still kind of learning the format and learning the curriculum. But I feel great about being able to teach what I know in this teacher training program. I could talk more about this teacher training program, but I'll just pause here with my update. I'm sure I'll have a lot more to talk about once this training is finished. Right now I feel like I'm in the middle of it, the thick of it. So it's been fun, exciting, new, and a lot of learning and also a lot of sharing. So it's been a great experience so far. Being in another country and also getting used to the new home, the town that I'm staying at, and new climate has been also an exciting change. I was a little bit worried about being able to still work while I am in Peru, work as in to teach my online classes, to continue my virtual mentorship, and also continue to be able to produce this podcast episode every week. But so far, internet seems to be okay. Sometimes it can be a little spotty, but I think for 85% of the time, I can rely on the internet. Sometimes that 85% is not enough if I'm teaching an important class online or something. But I think for now, 85% is, it's good. I'm happy with that. So let's get into today's conversation. I have interviewed my friend Taina for this podcast interview, and Taina and I met at a yoga studio we worked together in Long Beach. It was during the midst of pandemic when I met her, but then as soon as I realized that she was in a yoga study program at university in LA, I knew that I wanted to get to know her and become her friend. As all of you know, I am in love with continuing education with yoga, and anybody who chooses to pursue a master's degree in yoga or choose to pursue yoga therapy program that is very in-depth and quite a bit of commitment, both time-wise, financially, and energetically, usually are the people I really love talking to, just because I am also very similar in a way that I love continuing education. I love learning about yoga. And something interesting I want to share is that for this teacher training that I am working at in Peru, I was in charge of doing a lecture on history of yoga. And although I've taken many trainings and workshops where they talked about history of yoga, I never had to teach a history of yoga in depth before. So I did a lot of research on history of yoga because I really felt responsible to make sure I can teach the history well and bring in a different critical lens and perspective as much as possible. I was reading a lot of articles, listening to podcasts by different experts and historians, and I also decided to listen to the old recordings of the webinar that Taina has given me and my mentorship program in the past. She have given us 2 workshops One was about history of yoga and social change, and another one was history of yoga and cultural appropriation in the yoga world. They were such an amazing webinar that she has taught for us. And I went back and decided to listen to these recordings to really refresh my memory on history of yoga. And I got to listen to her lecture in a brand new set of ears this time. And she just have such a great gem in her lectures. And she brings in such an important perspective on history of yoga that not many teachers are talking about, this critical lens. And I really, really appreciated that. And she actually has offered to teach another workshop on history of yoga for my online studio and for my mentorship program, because she have told me that she updated her resources and curriculum on history of yoga. So I actually would love to bring her back on. But if anybody listening to this would also love to learn from Taina about history of yoga, please let me know so I can possibly open the webinar up to the public. If anybody wants to do a drop-in and join in on the webinar, you could join as well. And maybe after listening to Taina speak in this interview, you'll have a better idea of whether you would be interested in this webinar or not, which I'm pretty sure you would be after hearing her speak. She is just full of knowledge. So Taina Rodriguez-Berardi, her pronouns is she, her, hers. She is a scholar-practitioner of yoga's history, philosophy, traditions, and Sanskrit texts. She earned a master's in yoga studies from Loyola Marymount University, where she was the graduate student body vice president, and her research focused on the historical origins, culture, and customs of transnational yoga system at their intersection with social justice movements and activist communities. As a yoga teacher and yoga teacher training educator, Taina integrates revisionist history storytelling, embodiment practices, movement therapeutics, modern health science, and trauma-informed wellness to create equitable and accessible yoga class for people of all ages, sizes, shapes, abilities, and backgrounds. Taina truly believes that yoga can be beneficial to everyone and endeavors to create a holistic experience that harmonizes the entire mind, body, spirit community complex for all her students. Taina lectures at universities, facilitates workshop, teacher trainings, and group classes, and mentors other yoga teachers, entrepreneurs, and conscious business leaders with personalized support. Taina lives with her husband, twin toddlers, and her cat in Fallbrook, California, where they enjoy exploring the beaches, mountains, and backcountry nature spaces of Southern California and beyond. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Taina. I am also somebody who really loves accessible yoga, feels very passionate about teaching and spreading the knowledge of accessibility in yoga world that is also trauma informed. I really loved having this conversation with her. I hope you enjoy this conversation, and I will speak to you on the other side. Welcome, Taina, for coming to join me on the Full-Time Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm so happy and excited to have you join us today and share your stories and your journey. So thank you.
Thanks for having me, Reika. It feels like a little reunion for me to see your face and be in community with you, even though we are in different cities. And I'm glad to be here and to talk to you.
Yeah. So Taina and I met in Long Beach. We used to teach at the same yoga studio, and that's how we met. And it was during the pandemic, I think we met.
Mm-hmm.
But now she have moved. So where are you logging in from? Where do you live now? Tell the listener.
So after the pandemic, really, for several reasons, both graduating from my master's program, but also I was pregnant with twins, and my husband and I decided to move back down to San Diego where we had initially met, 10 plus years ago. And we ended up in a little town called Fallbrook. And it's, a little bit about 10 miles off the coast. It's the kind of last city in San Diego County before you get to Temecula and Riverside County. But it's a very sweet little, almost, I'm not going to call it rural, but it is when you compare it to something like Long Beach, right? So yeah, we opted for a yard and fruit trees and a view of the mountains. So that's where we landed.
Yeah, and it's especially with your twins, it's so nice they have space that they get to run around in your yard. It's a lot harder to find that in the city. So I think it's great.
Yeah, we loved Long Beach. Like, to be very honest, we were hoping to, find a place that made sense for us there, because I'm from Oakland, California, and Long Beach reminded me a lot of Oakland, of being back home, like the cultural diversity, kind of the ability to do in Long Beach, and also its proximity to like this big city, LA, or with Oakland, San Francisco, and just kind of this mecca of, arts and culture and food and learning. I felt like it was, a throwback for me to the Bay Area growing up. And also it's like by the beach. So we were able to, that beach path in Long Beach, you can't beat. So.
Yeah, I know. I think spoiled that I live like a couple blocks away from that beach path. And I feel like when you live here and when you live so close to it, I don't go there as much. I don't take advantage of those things, So you're reminding me to maybe go take a walk on the beach path today.
Yeah, that beach path during the pandemic until it closed was like my saving daily meditation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, being able to walk around outside was definitely necessary during that time. So when I met you, I think you have just graduated from the yoga studies program. So maybe tell us, how long have you been teaching yoga?
So I'll even take a step back. Like, I've been practicing yoga since I feel like towards the latter part of my being in college, or, towards the latter part of my 20s. And I really, having grown up in the Bay Area, if I even start before that, I was like, I knew what yoga was, I knew what meditation was, and it was not something that was unusual to me. Like, I feel like my parents, had friends that practice yoga. My mom has practiced yoga throughout her life. And so it was something I knew was a place for healing, for, coming to grounding and even finding community. And so fast forward, I went to school in San Diego. So that's what brought me to San Diego. I went to San Diego State for undergrad. And I was, just like any other person trying to make it adult, for the first time in their life, you find yourself I found myself overwhelmed, with school, and I had a full-time job because I had to pay for school and pay for my, all the things that come with being quote unquote independent adult. And, you have friends and significant others, and all of that can be very stressful. And I found myself stressed out, and, a friend had given me this book, and I still have the book. And it was basically a book with this woman, with this blue leotard on, and she's in, has one leg behind her head, and, Anjali Mudra, looking like very serene and peaceful. And I was like, this is supposed to help me like become unstressed. So, I looked through it, and it was like a lot of asana and meditation, and maybe some mudra. And there was some, excuse me, there was some, just meditative stuff that I kind of paid attention to. But other than that, I was kind of a turnoff. Just, the book itself was a little overwhelming. And I was like, this is what yoga is? Like, that doesn't seem resonant with me or where I'm at in my life at this moment. And so, fast forward even further, I started working in the video game industry and, worked at this company in San Diego. I worked for a subsidiary of Sony. And so came in as an assistant and kind of worked my way up over the next 15 years within the organization. And, thinking that this is like, my goal, right, is to get a corporate job and work my way up through hard work and showing up and, doing me, basically, and kind of living that American dream. And long story short, I'm traveling the world and I have 2 cell phones and email is attached to me day and night. And, whatever goes on with the company is, affects my day-to-day experience in life. At that time, I had friends who invited me to go to a hot vinyasa power yoga class. And so I went with them. And, it was a time to connect with my friends, to, just try something new. And the first day, I remember I was just hooked. I was like, what is this magic? I feel entirely cleansed, both like physically, but also mentally, and even, from the heart, right? I left that class feeling cleansed and aware and just kind of lucid. So I like immediately bought Manduka mat and started going to class with them and was just like, what is this? Like, it's physical, it's mental, I don't even know what it is. And so I started, practicing yoga like every day after work. And it was just a way to escape kind of that corporate life and the corporate machine, if you will. And after a while of practicing and learning more about yoga, recognizing that a lot of its traditions or philosophy resonated with what I grew up with, like spiritually, and recognizing nature and the universality of life as like kind of my higher power, and just started to recognize that in my life, I wanted more of that. And my job started to be at odds with that philosophy or that sensation, right? So if I'm going to work all day and feeling stressed and, leaving really suffering, if you will, and going to yoga, and that's what is making me more at ease, there's something going on there. And I kind of just started to really hone into that just intuitively and recognize that although I was getting to travel all the time and I had a corporate credit card and like all these things that, even people would come up to me at events and they'd be like, oh my goodness, you have my dream job. And I recognized, I was like, this is not my dream job. This is, I'm actually taking up the space of somebody whose dream job this is. And it got to the point where I was practicing yoga and doing this job. And, my husband was in grad school and doing his PhD program. So it was one of those things where I was like, I need to come up with a plan of what I want to do next, or just even, I know that this is not what I want to do forever. So throughout that time, I had gone back to school and gotten my MBA. And that, was a real, awakening for me, just in terms of leveling up my awareness of what goes on at the business level of all types of organizations. And I think that was something that later and continues to provide and be fruitful for me. But when I finished my MBA, I kind of, as a gift to myself, I was like, I'm going to take teacher training. I don't know if I'm going to be a teacher, maybe, and I kind of picture myself, I'm like, when I have gray hair, I'll teach yoga and like, it'll be something I do later in life. And it's just, I want to deepen my practice. And so I signed up for teacher training and did teacher training in 2012. And immediately, and this sounds so cliche and I hate kind of saying it, but I love saying it because it is very true. It changed my life, right? I recognized the power and voice I have as a teacher, right? Because when I step into a yoga space, and especially at that time, I'm a Chicana. I'm a Mexican American woman. I'm fuller bodied. I'm very brown skinned. I don't have the typical, dancer, gymnast, yoga body, if you will, of a modern contemporary practice. I wasn't necessarily wearing the yoga clothes that, are modeled on Instagram or anything. Not that Instagram was necessarily a thing back then, but, like there's this, if I do this with my students, the first thing I ask them to do is mentally Google yoga in your mind. And what are the images that come up? And it's always a, very flexy, bendy, leotard wearing, picture. And I would do that back in the day and say, that's the definition of yoga. But even still, that's not me. And so taking the teacher training made me recognize that there's so much necessity, opportunity, and like it's almost my imperative to go out and teach yoga as a Latina, as a woman, as a fuller bodied, teacher, as a teacher that comes from, a background that isn't of the norm of, who has access to yoga these days. So that kind of lit a fire under me, and I made it my goal to quit my job and take a break and pursue yoga, and see where that took me.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing all of that. And I think it's so important what you shared, because you're right. We see a very typical quote unquote yogi on Instagram on the cover of the yoga magazines, or when we Google search yoga, what shows up. And I hope it is changing a little bit more these days. But people like you, or people who have tighter body, or people who have different color of skins, we all deserve to take up space in the yoga world. And I'm so happy that that's like, there was a strong feeling you felt during your teacher training, that you went for that inner knowing of just like, I'm going to take this teacher training, I'm going to do it. I, like everybody else, also deserve this space. And being able to see more teachers of different shapes, colors, age, it's so also important for students to be able to see that. And it's like, oh, I also have space here. Like there's a teacher who look like me. And I think that's so important. And I remember feeling like I was such a tight body practitioner, and still am, that I remember like, oh my God, like I will never be able to do this pose of putting the leg behind the back, behind the head, or be able to do the full splits, or also being a second language, English second language, not really quite fitting in. And it's important to know that we too have space in the yoga world, So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. I think even I remember even just now going through teacher training and was like, I want to teach people like my mom, my aunts, my, people that don't necessarily think yoga is for them, but would entirely benefit from its practices, mind, body, spirit, emotional, etc. And I think because of this, the model of the, what we've kind of coined as the modern industrial yoga complex, right? The kind of brick and mortar yoga studio owned by venture capitalists kind of model, because there is so many barriers to entry within that kind of space, or that model of yoga within the capitalistic frame. Those type of people step into a studio and either don't see themselves in the teachers or in the space, or don't necessarily have the expendable resource of time or money. And so because they're not showing up every day at 8 a.m. or 6 a.m. to take, every single class, like the model doesn't cater to their needs or their desires. And I've even found that, throughout my time as a teacher, it's like, because of the audience that I intend to teach, the broadness of that audience, and maybe their nonconformity and the reasons that because for their nonconformity, they don't fit the model. And therefore, studio owners aren't necessarily like chomping at the bit to have these classes that have, not as many students, but they're the students that I want to make sure have the offering, right?
Yes, definitely. And also make sure that they feel seen, that they all have space in the yoga room, yoga community, yoga studio. So grateful that all the work that you do that I want to get into. But before that, how was your teacher training? How did you choose that teacher training? And also, what was the format of your teacher training? Was it like 1 month intensive versus like over the 3 or 6 month? What was your 200 hours like?
So my 200 hour, I just chose it based on the studio that I was going to that was closest to my house. And it was at a big box yoga studio chain. And, that was proximity for me. It was where I practiced, where I knew a lot of the teachers. It was very physically focused. And so looking back at it now, and as a person who offers teacher trainings, it's kind of, I'm actually grateful for that experience because it provided me opportunity, or like kind of like the lay of the land, to recognize what I do and don't want to offer as a yoga educator. And so that 200-hour training was, over the course of 3 months, I want to say. So, it was come on Wednesday evenings after work, and we'd have a couple hours, and then Saturday, Sunday all day. And it was taught by a group of teachers who, some would be there some weekends, and then, they'd switch just depending on the topic. Most of the focus was on learning a specific sequence and learning, specific postures, sun salutation, vinyasa flow style stuff. Notably, we spent maybe half a day on history and philosophy. Notably, we spent like, half a day or, a Saturday or something on anatomy. But it was mostly just asana based and really focused on that. And it was something that it was a large group of all women who were taking this, and all of them were, I was probably in the middle range of age at the time. So there were some people that were a lot younger and some quite a bit older. But I did feel still even a little out of the norm of that group, just in terms of, background, and just, I just felt a little different, right? A little browner, a little thicker, and a little not as much money, maybe necessarily as everybody else. So, or not as much expendable time either. So
I can relate. Now I'm thinking back to my 200-hour experience, and I got a scholarship. So I was able to get half off, which helped me quite a bit in exchange of like helping out, getting there early, leaving late to clean up the studio and stuff. And it was in Santa Monica. And I was the only one who had to catch the public transportation to get the teacher training every single day, because mine was a 1 month intensive. And I just felt like, yeah, definitely. I felt like, yeah, my experience seems quite different than everyone else's, for sure. But I'm glad that you took that training. And you said that after the training, you felt the calling to quit your full-time job and really pursue yoga. Was that really that like abrupt of a change? What, you just like quit one day and decide to start teaching yoga? How did that transition go?
I think it was growing. So I had been practicing for quite a while before I did the teacher training, probably about 5 years or something like that, as a student primarily. I think we're always students, so I say that with a grain of salt. But once I did the teacher training, and some friends and I, who were also, subsequently did their own teacher trainings, some of my best friends, we started teaching a free class in a park in San Diego, and just offering it every Saturday. And all three of us would show up, or sometimes if I had to be out of town, the other two would show up, or if, there was three of us, so somebody could always be there on a Saturday, which made it like great, because you didn't have to like be committed to every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., can't go anywhere, etc. But we loved it. It was outside. We took advantage of San Diego. It was donation based, so we were, using that money to buy props and bring them to the park with us. So it wasn't necessarily about making money necessarily. It was more getting experience, teaching a diverse amount of people, having time with each other and just practicing teaching. And so all the while in the background, I'm getting promoted at my corporate job and taking on more work and getting more frustrated with the, work-life balance and all of that. I can't remember the exact moment, or actually, I don't remember the exact moment from a yoga perspective, but I do remember my husband and I having a conversation, probably one of many conversations about how I wanted to find something else to do and wanted to quit my job. And he works in statistics and psychology and social science and teaches, at Chapman University in Orange. And he was telling me that he read some statistic that men who don't graduate from college or don't have a men who don't have a college degree, a huge percentage of them, it was something like 40 to 60% or something. I can't remember exactly, but it was very impressive. Men who don't have a college degree spend something of like 40 hours a week playing video games. And I was like shocked and also very hurt.
Wow.
Because it was something like they basically have a full-time job playing video games, while also, if you think about what it's saying, is they don't have a college degree. So, there's not a lot of jobs. There are lots of jobs out there that you can do without a college degree, yoga being one of them, really. But when you think about the whole of society, that just means no college degree. You're probably making less money. You're probably, living in a different economic status, et cetera. But then you're also spending 40 hours a week playing video games. So that to me was like one of those things that made me think, our company had always been based in like fantasy games. And then we started making first person shooter games. And so I was starting to struggle with that ethically in terms of like, how do I feel about living this yogic lifestyle in every other aspect of my life or striving towards that. But then in the way that I make my money and fund the rest of my life, fund all my yoga courses and retreats and all of that is through teaching people how to shoot guns and kill each other. And while there are definitely merits to video games like friendship and communication and, meeting people for those who are more isolated, that's not something that I was like really compatible with. And so I started thinking more and more about that. And just, I think that bug started inundating my thoughts more and more. And it made it just so I made a goal, and it took probably like a year. Cause obviously, one of my main things was like, I need health insurance. I was like, if I have health insurance, like I will feel that much better about quitting my job. So my husband finished his PhD and got a position at a university with health insurance. So that to me, I'm fortunate. I'm blessed. I'm privileged in that way that I had that safety net, right? Also, the fact that I did have this corporate job, I was able to save up money and put away a bunch of savings so that I could kind of float myself while I figured out what to do next. So once my husband got his job, we knew that way far in advance because of how the academic system works. He started his job, and for a month we both worked and had like amazing, we had double income, no kids, right? That's it. And we were like, we're rich. And then I quit my job later. That it was planned. I quit my job and started just figuring out what to do next.
Wow. That whole statistic of video games and how you felt in conflict with earning money from a company that was, I guess, kind of encouraging people to be spending about 40 hours a week on video games. And especially the part you said your company started making shooting games and how that felt more in conflict with your values. That must have been like a very interesting dichotomy that was happening inside of you, whenever I feel like there's some kind of friction or something feels off, like it doesn't fit very well, align well with my purpose, that, that friction inside of me, maybe it's that voice is very small in the beginning, but as time passes, that voice or that discomfort kind of starts to get bigger and bigger. It's like, okay, yeah. And then as you said, you made a 1 year plan to exit out of that job. So it seems like you did it very smartly too. Like you knew you were going to quit, but you wanted to wait a year and have enough savings and wait till your husband got a job that had an insurance. So it seems like it was pretty well planned, but you kind of knew which direction you were heading.
Yeah, it was well planned. It was still scary as hell. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life was to quit this really cozy, comfy job where, I mean, the people were like family. I'd worked with them for 12 years. They were some of my best friends, but once I had that plan in my mind, every day was like torture to go, even though, I generally loved what I was doing and loved the people I was working with, but I truly felt that I was meant to do something different. And that course of my life had kind of run its thread to the very end, right? I had learned all the things I felt like I needed to learn, or they helped me pay for grad school for my MBA. I've taught so many. I was taught so many lessons, working within the corporate world. It helped really my ability to speak in front of large audiences and convey messages, in, really concise and creative ways. So I think that this lifetime afforded me that opportunity to tee up kind of the next stage of my life and my offering.
Yeah, yeah. And while you were working busy full time for this company and your husband was in school, were you the kind of like the breadwinner, the provider of your family?
Yes, he was like my kept student kind of thing. No, we joke about it a lot because we even bought a condo during that time. And he's like, I don't know any other grad students that are like buying condos. And I was like, yeah, like you're kind of lucky, right? But what's great is there was no ego about it. It was less, I knew that him getting his PhD was like this life goal of his. It was going to pay in dividends later because there's a lot of security in working for the academic or university system. Things like insurance are guaranteed and, a flexible schedule and whatnot. And so to me, it was part of that partnership was recognizing that, yeah, like I'm having to stay in this job for an extra year, even though it like makes my skin crawl necessarily, so that we can have a better life later. And so that once you get your job, then it's my turn to kind of be the student. And I ended up going back to grad school again, and he floated me kind of through that time. So it's thanks to this partnership and our relationship, we were both able to kind of live our dharma, if you will, or work towards that. And, recognize that we're both, interestingly enough, we're both educators, right? We're both people that are serving, not necessarily in the limelight, but serving in terms of things that were given to me from my family. Like they told me, my parents didn't go to college. They didn't have the opportunity to. That wasn't something that their parents, necessarily had the means of teaching them how to do college or get into college or any of those things. So like my dad and mom's goals reflected us going to college and knowledge as power, right? They saw that if we could learn whatever it is that we wanted to, we could change our lives, change the world. My sister's a doctor. I feel like I've, gone to school and followed my passions. Like to me, I'm living out their dreams for me because they had to work to survive, right? So they took any opportunity to do that and couldn't follow their dreams, right? So I'm so grateful for their instilling that in me and saying, and that was kind of part of it too. I was living this job and I had seen my mom work her job and not love her job, right? My mom went to work so that she could pay the bills and give us all the opportunity that she could. And I even remember mentally saying to myself, like, what service would that be to my mother, to my family, if I continued in this job just for the money or just for the, the perks of it, but my needs for service to others. And so that was actually a catalyst too, was recognizing that was like that little voice in my head saying, like, who are you to squander the sacrifices that she made, right? So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. It gave me a goosebump in parts of the story that you're sharing. After you made a decision to quit your corporate job, what came next for you? Did you start teaching yoga right away? Did you have a couple months of break where you weren't doing anything? How did that transition from quitting your job to focusing more on teaching yoga?
Yeah, I had been teaching at the park, and I think I'd already started just teaching like once a week at a studio or something. Yeah, I think at that time I'd already just been dabbling in teaching in a broader sense of the definition. But once I quit, I found myself with free time, and quickly, I'm not one of those people that you're like, what do I do with my time? It's like quickly you can fill up that time so, easily. And I started making jewelry and doing kind of events in the yoga space with that, with art and jewelry and stuff like that. But through that, I met a bunch of yoga studio owners, and one of them had just opened up her studio, and she was looking for some kind of help on the just business side, communications, just recognizing opportunities within the local landscape. And so, I started working with her behind the scenes and, helping her manage the studio in different capacities. And that was really helpful because I got to learn more about yoga as a business, yoga within local communities, how to build communities, because that's actually the work I'd been doing all along, but just in a different capacity, right? And so I was teaching at the studio, maybe that studio and another one, and just started to, on a day-to-day, be at the studio, checking in people, talking to students, recognizing the patterns within, all of our attendants and the people that came through the door. So that was kind of one of those transition moments, I think, for me, because the studio itself also had a lot of other things that weren't necessarily yoga per se, but they were offering them as a yoga studio, like ecstatic dance or Akashic record, meditations and massage therapy and like all of these different practitioners, Reiki practitioners, massage therapists, acupuncturists it was a collective. So there was a lot of different practitioners and modalities being housed under this one kind of yogic umbrella. And it really sparked my interest to understand more about yoga and its origins. And I say this because going into a class there, you would practice asana, you would do a meditation, maybe you would chant, maybe you would, the practitioner would, be putting sage or palo santo. Maybe they would be talking about, past life regression or, something that I was always like, well, is all of this yoga? Like, what aspects were taught traditionally from a yogic perspective, or is this more creeping into the world of like self-help or therapy, or it just seemed very jumbled up to me, and I was like trying to pick through the strands and understand where everything came from, and it really sparked my interest in learning more about yoga from that perspective. And then additionally, it was a very diverse studio. So there was a lot of students who were, over 50, who didn't necessarily have the youthful, bendy body that, many practitioners of yoga come into the practice with. And so I was teaching a lot of older students, a lot of students with, of all ages, but with different abilities. And for me, that started to pique my interest and kind of go back to, I want to teach people like my mom and my aunts and, people with all types of, backgrounds. And I started craving to learn more. And that's where I kind of started link diving and Googling and all of that. And I found the yoga therapy program at Loyola Marymount University. And I was really interested in that and applied and started, actually got one of the women that I taught at the park yoga with. She was also interested. And since it's in LA at Loyola Marymount University, it's a program that you go once a month for a full weekend. So it was kind of like a weekend immersion program. So we both got into the program and decided to do it. Her sister lived in Santa Monica, so we would couch surf and go to these yoga therapy weekends, sleep in Santa Monica, and then go to Loyola Marymount. And it was amazing because we were learning from really high quality yoga teachers who were also therapists, chiropractors, PhDs, physical therapists, like all sorts of people, but under the lens of yoga therapy. So looking at yoga in an applied sense to work with individuals on how to utilize yogic techniques, whether it's philosophy, asana, pranayama, meditation, to help alleviate them of their suffering. And that could be physical suffering, mental, emotional, etc., full body complex.
Yeah.
And so that was where I kind of started the education journey with yoga.
And how long was your yoga therapy program? Because I remember reading or hearing about this different level, right? There's level 1, level 2. So how long does each one takes to graduate, and how far did you continue with the yoga therapy program?
So yoga therapy at LMU has since changed, but I think in for a really in a positive way. But when I was going, I did it for a year. So I did the first level of yoga therapy. My friend went on and completed all of the levels, but each level is like a year of training. And so the first year is really fundamentals. You're working through all of the different systems of the body and applying, yogic principles to different types of bodies, different types of abilities, different types of, stages of life, and recognizing that application and how you can utilize it as a yoga therapist. While I was in the program, there was also some women who were in my same class that were in the yoga studies master's program, the graduate program. And one of them had, I remember this so clearly, she had a shirt. It was from the program, and in Sanskrit, in Devanagari, it said yoga. But at the time, I didn't know that. And I was like, what does your shirt say? And she says, it says yoga. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. I was like, she's like, yeah, I'm in the master's program here, and we learn Sanskrit and all, and she started kind of going into the details of the program. And I was like, oh my goodness, that sounds amazing. There's a master's program for yoga. Like, I thought I was like in it with the therapy program, but there's something about history and philosophy. And like I said, I'm a forever student. So that to me was more akin to the direction that I was looking for to answer all those previous questions that I had. Like, how do sound bowls come into the mix of yoga? Where does the harmonium come into the mix? Like, what are the origins of the philosophies of yoga? And so that is kind of where I recognize an opportunity for me to answer a lot, or attempt to answer all of those questions, a lot of those questions. And so I looked into the master's program and quickly realized that I should apply.
So you knew when you were in the yoga therapy program, but as soon as you found out yoga studies program existed, you knew that was more of your path than continuing with the yoga therapy, different, like next level of the yoga therapy program.
Yes, I think I want to go back and still do what the version of their new yoga therapy program is, because I think just like you, I feel like there's so many areas of yoga to like deep dive into, and I like want to do them all. Really, it's such a wealth of knowledge and so applicable. And yeah, I think I just felt like my immediate questions were more focused on, the history and philosophy and the texts and that type of thing. So I felt like the therapy program was a really solid foundation for understanding the body, its systems, applications. I knew I couldn't really do both just monetarily and then also just time wise. So after the first year of therapy, I moved over to the master's program. That being said, you do need like a prerequisite at LMU, and the therapy program counted as that. So I kind of came in with some credits already.
Nice.
So that was nice.
Mm-hmm. So you did 1 year of yoga therapy, got your level 1, and you started the yoga studies program. Is it total of 2 years? Is a yoga study program?
Yes, it's a fully accredited graduate program. It's 2 years. I believe our cohort was the first one that implemented the online structure. So I was going full time as a in-person student. So we packed up our San Diego stuff and moved to Long Beach. So that's how I ended up in Long Beach to go to this graduate program. And I felt for me, my learning style, I love in person. I was kind of also trying to redo college in a way. For my undergrad, I felt like I was like really rushing through it because I wanted to get a real job. I don't know why, but obviously I needed money. But so, I didn't do the spring break trips. I didn't do the semester abroad. Like I was always working while I was in undergrad and trying to make rent and like all of those things. So I didn't participate necessarily in, all of the wonderful things that college offers you, like groups and communities and all of, all of that. So I wanted to go all in on yoga school, second round, my second graduate program. And even my MBA program was a cohort, totally different. So moving up to Long Beach, I was able to go to class in person. I applied to be a graduate assistant. So I was the technology graduate assistant, helping implement this first virtual cohort. I was paid. So that was part of the nice aspect of it. And also it got me in community more deeply with the professors, the academic staff, because also the influence of my husband being professor. I knew that was something I was really interested in terms of teaching in a higher education institution. So I kind of wanted to learn the inner works of that. And also I wanted to have some sort of money. I couldn't necessarily quit. I had to quit my studio job down in San Diego to do this. And I ended up even running for student government and became the graduate student vice president because that it was just like this really amazing opportunity that I had never taken advantage of before. And so I was like, why not now? I have the time and the mental capacity now, right? And so part of my platform was like really making sure that graduate students as a whole were kind of underrepresented because just they're a smaller percentage of university student population. But also within that, the yoga studies department was very small and underrepresented. And then also just minority students, right? Students at the margins of, both culturally, financially. So that was something I really wanted to focus on, was making sure that our voices were heard within not only student government, but the wider reaches of the, academic function.
I have a couple of follow-up questions.
Okay.
When you decided to quit your corporate job, and maybe also the time that you decided to I'm going to do yoga therapy program and I'm going to do yoga study program and start kind of really going deeper and deeper. How did your family or your friends react to you choosing to pursue yoga in this way? Was there any pushback or disapproval or encouragement? What was that like from your peers?
I think most people were curiously just questioning whether this was a viable means of making a living or a smart decision.
Yeah.
But I think people that know me know that I do everything in my life with as much purpose and intention as I possibly can. Obviously, I'm, open to things that fall in my lap too, but, I take a lot of care and thought into doing most of the things that I pursue in my life. So my family, I'd already had a graduate degree. And so to me, explaining it to them was I just wanted to pursue my passions in yoga and really understand at a deeper level to be able to teach a broader audience, a broader community. So they were kind of like, go for it. Like, this is cool. We don't necessarily understand what you're talking about, but like, cool. Yeah. My friends who are all yoga, many of them are yoga teachers or yoga practitioners. They were like, what? There's yoga grad school? Like, you can get a master's degree in yoga? Like, what is this magic, And so they were very, supportive and wanted to know what I was learning about and how it was applicable in, as yoga teachers. My old work people were like, I don't know what are you talking about? Like, you're going to teach yoga like in a studio. And that's, I think, a lot of what's interesting, even you providing this platform to talk about being a full-time yoga teacher. When people think about full-time yoga teacher, they picture like Jane Fonda in a workout room or something like that, or some version of that. But there's so many opportunities to be in the field of yoga, make your career, about teaching and or living out the practices and traditions of yoga. And I've found that I enjoy teaching, weekly classes because it brings me, an embodiment of community and, friendship and all of these kind of like connective tissue type of things. For me, what I'm truly interested in is talking about the history and the origins and the texts. And I mean, even this morning I woke up at, I don't know why I do these things to myself, but I woke up at 6 a.m. and jumped on a Zoom kind of webinar about some of the latest research about the Hatha Yoga Pradipika or the Hatha Pradipika. And some of the research that's coming out of the yoga center or the SOAS yoga studies program and the Oxford yoga studies program or Hindu studies program. Like, they have these amazing, research projects that are, focusing on uncovering some of the ancient truths. Right. So those are the things that I'm like, ooh, let me log in at 6 a.m. listen to this because to me, it's very interesting.
Yeah.
And it's part of what I, that melding of the ancient and the modern contemporary, that intersection is where I think it's like really cool, like where my interests kind of are planted necessarily.
Yeah. And your husband was fully supportive too?
Yeah, he was like, you supported me and my academic endeavors. So, I'll support you. Obviously, like I said, we had a savings. So I think that helped. If I had come with $0, then he'd probably be like, let's think about this. But no, we were pretty, stable and comfortable. And so we had planned and, made it to where I could kind of pursue some things that I wanted to, and even just think we were talking about it the other day. I kind of like looked around and was like, whoa, I really did this. I went from one career and midstream just totally shifted gears. I went back to school. I found a way to make a living within the realm that I wanted to be. Because I remember when I was in the video game industry, I would like have to read these articles about video games. And I was like, oh God, I don't want to read another video game article. Like, it's my job, but I don't want to. Now I'm like waking up at 6 a.m. to watch a webinar about yoga, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'm curious to know how, when you were in school, when you were in yoga studies program, that 2-year program, What did you envision yourself after graduating? What kind of job opportunity were you hoping to get, or were you seeing your other graduates that were pursuing after graduating that program? So where were you, what kind of goal, or I don't know, where were you envisioning after graduation during that time?
At that time, I had this idea that I wanted to bring yoga education to people who might not necessarily encounter it at the studio level. So my thoughts were, at the community college level, which there are many programs that provide teacher trainings at the community college level. To me, that it was almost like teaching a trade, right? Like you can learn auto mechanics, you can learn medical assistant, all of these different kind of, not necessarily a 4-year college, but something that might take a couple years of, regular coursework. To me, yoga teacher fit within that category, especially, if you could do it for, $30 a credit or something like that, like that community college pricing. So that was an idea in terms of democratizing yoga and knowing that I wanted to be in education, having seen a bit of community colleges, especially in California, do that. That was initially kind of what I had aspired or thought that I would take this degree and go do or create, teaching programs for young adults who are kind of new. Maybe they didn't want to go right to college, but somewhere in between, needed that gap year or something like that. But while I was studying, and also I started grad school in fall of 2019. So we had a semester of in-person classes, on campus, etc. As we all know, the first quarter of 2020 changed all of our lives. And so quickly we found ourselves doing all of our classes online, all of our plans to go to India that summer, because every summer between the first and second year, the yoga studies graduate program goes to India as a group and for a month, or if not longer. And so all of those plans halted because we were in the middle of a global pandemic.
Oh, that's a
yeah. Yeah. So everything changed. Luckily, because I was the graduate tech assistant and we were implementing our first virtual cohort, for us, really nothing changed except for the people that were going to school in person were now online with everybody else. Because I was having to facilitate in class our learning, but then also connect our virtual cohort like in real time. So I was already that conduit. So we just made the transition very easily. That being said, not having to travel to LA on a regular basis throughout the week, I was able to start practicing more really Yoga on the Bluff in Long Beach. And being at Yoga on the Bluff, it's basically, for those who haven't been there, it's a place where it's a grassy knoll kind of overlooking the Long Beach Bay, really, the beach and the bay, and you can see Catalina Island. But it's also next to one of Long Beach's major streets, running right next to it. But every weekend, upwards of, hundreds of people are practicing yoga there on this bluff. And it was the first place that I'd really, besides like a accessible yoga conference or something that was intended for that purpose, Yoga on the Bluff is the first place I had really practiced next to somebody in a wheelchair, somebody in a practicing chair, just a regular chair, people on mats, people with their kids, people that are unhoused, joining the practice, people of all different racial backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, sizes, ages. Like it's truly very diverse. And I was like, really, and it's beautiful. It's outside. You're in the sun. And to me, it was just inspiring way to think about the future of yoga. How do we create more spaces like this? And it ended up being what I focused my my program thesis on, was thinking about accessibility from a modern scale, having the opportunity to interview the teachers and students at Yoga on the Bluff. I did a survey there, and it really looking at yoga from a very critical yoga lens, social justice, transformative justice, thinking about how we lower the barriers to entry to allow more people to practice yoga, or to invite more people. It's not about allowing, it's inviting, to providing opportunity for. And so that kind of shifted my, I guess, idea of how to think about yoga, but also, where I wanted to go with my practice or with my teaching.
And that was your thesis, right? Your master's thesis was on that, Yoga on the Bluff.
That was my master's thesis. Mm-hmm. Additionally, at the same time that I was finishing my master's thesis, I found out that I was pregnant with twins. So that totally changed everything too. And that's when we moved down to Fallbrook and whatnot. And I was like, okay, if it was one, I'd probably continue to work and do all these things. But with two, that's a true game changer, true life changer. So yeah, I was, for the first, I want to say 18 months, I stayed home with them and really focused on just providing them love and shaping their young lives. Much of what it changed the concept of what I even think about yoga too. I used to, and I still think, finding yoga in my 20s, I felt like I was blessed, right? Because I was like, oh, maybe this lifetime I'm finding yoga, in my 20s. Maybe next lifetime I'll find it, when I'm so much younger, and that'll, encourage my liberation that much sooner, or, affect my life and those around me so much sooner. And then when I had the kids, I was like, wow, maybe it's my job to teach them yoga, to teach them the principles, the traditions. That's why.
Wow.
That's my purpose.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a parent, so I don't know, but I hear other yoga teachers talk about parenting is like the best practice of yoga. And
totally.
Like some of the Ashtangi would say that's the 6th series, that's the hardest series, hardest practice of yoga is becoming a parent. And it teaches you so much.
I was washing dishes or bottles or something when they were very young. And I was like looking out my window at the outside world. I was like, I just want to go to a yoga class, or have some time to meditate or go for a walk. Or it was just in the throes of having 2 very young children. And I was washing bottles, and I was like, no, this is your yoga. Washing the dishes, how mindful, how focused can you be? How aware, how, how can I make this my practice? This is my life now. So yoga is not going to this perfect space where everything is pristine and you have a mat and you have the clothes and you have the teacher and you have all that's not the yoga. The yoga is how do you bring it into every aspect of your life and recognize the opportunities therein, right? And so that was a moment where I checked myself and I was like, okay, wait a second. This is what you've been practicing for. This is the moment, right? So.
Yeah, wow, that's so beautifully said. I love that. So maybe tell us, graduating and then having twins, you had some time of, you said about 18 months, you were just at home raising them, to kind of now, it seems like you have a lot, from what I see on your, social media, it seems like you have a lot of exciting things happening. So tell me about different projects, different trainings you're involved in, different streams of income that you have now that is yoga related. How has your a yoga career shifted?
Yeah, that's a good question. So even when they were young, I feel like I think at 4 months, I kind of took a little break, but at 4 months, teacher training season kind of came around again. And at the time, I was doing modules for teacher trainings focused on the history, origins, yoga philosophy, accessible yoga. So I was invited to join several 200-hour training staff teaching these modules all over Southern California. So some in Long Beach, some in LA, and even beyond that, and a lot in San Diego. Opportunity to teach yoga in this capacity was kind of like really exciting for me because it was really, well, one, the culture was shifting, right? Coming out of the pandemic, coming out of a lot of Me Too moments, and that summer of 2020 with, all of the heightened awareness of, the murdering of our Black brothers and sisters, of George Floyd, like there was a social awakening, but also within the yoga space, there was some recognition of how inaccessible much of the offering is and how non-diverse much of teacher studio staffing, teacher training staffing, what do you call it, festivals, all of that were very white, very thin, very able-bodied, right? Very catering to the upper echelon of society, right? With these extravagant retreats and, extravagant like yoga classes that are just focused on, peak postures and, and I'm not saying you can't learn how to handstand, but like that was kind of becoming the way to sell yoga, right? And so I think a lot of studio owners took a look at their marketing, their teacher trainings, and recognized there's a lot of void. Like I said, even from my first teacher training, there was nothing about history or origins or honoring the practice or the lineage or the tradition. I mean, there was very little of that, right? I think we covered like 3 sutras, right, from the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, and it was just very much like, yeah, and that's that. You can look at that later. So luckily, I had built a network of yoga studio owners and teacher trainers because I've been teaching for more than 10 years now. So I think now those people are having their own teacher trainings and recognize like, oh, hey, and I kept them aware and abreast of what I was doing. And like, hey, if you ever, do a teacher training, I'd be interested in teaching history and offering this really deep and critical lens, looking at not only just, yoga is this ancient tradition, but how does it get to our awareness in contemporary times? How and why do we practice in the way and styles that we do? Where does that come from? And how does Western sensibilities and techniques and traditions come into play with kind of the South Asian traditions of yoga and whatnot? So, having that network really was helpful to kind of let people know, hey, this is what I'm doing now. And especially in light of the times, right? Like we should be really more aware. And teacher trainings for me, it's like, this is like an important part of learning about yoga. How can you be a yoga practitioner and even a teacher and not know where it comes from? And so, I was able to, even just when the twins were 4 months old, I remember, I think I was driving down to San Diego from Long Beach and teaching in a training. And from there, I have several trainings that I am a part of, but also co-leading. So where my focus is teaching history and origins, accessible yoga as social change, and then even some of the texts. So the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, the Hatha Pradipika, the one I woke up at 6 a.m. today for. So for me, while I do teach in a studio here in Fallbrook on a weekly basis, I teach a fundamentals class, so an asana, pranayama meditation class. But for me, it's for the core audience of my intention of people who are either new to the practice or wanting to engage the practice in a more meaningful way beyond just a hot vinyasa style. So that's kind of how I've utilized my master's degree in yoga studies in one way. And then when the kids were about 18 months, one of my professors had put a call out on his social media saying that he had started a nonprofit education platform, and they were looking for somebody that had communications and marketing experience, yoga, dharmic studies experience, and also educational experience. And I was like, wait a second, I think that's me. Yeah, I wasn't looking for a full-time job, but it kind of fell into my lap. And now I work, the platform is Arihanta Institute, and it's an online education platform. We have a master's program in engaged Jain studies. We have a lot of courses online that are anywhere from like 4 to 10 hours teaching Jain studies or engaged Jain studies, which is also Jainism is a dharmic tradition where we're teaching folks how to use those traditions and philosophies and apply them to their daily life. So some of you may not be aware of Jainism or have ever heard of it, but it too has its core principle as ahimsa, or nonviolence, non-harming, just like yoga does. So to me, it really resonates, taking all of the things that I've learned from not only an academic perspective, but again, even going back to the reason why, or one of the major reasons why I quit my corporate job, was to try and do my part in easing the suffering of humanity, of not falling into this violent offering, and actually trying to even go the opposite direction. So I think it all fell into place so far.
Wow. So is that a full-time job?
Yeah, for the most part, it's a full-time job, but it's a remote job. So I get to still teach yoga on a weekly basis, and I'm still a part of teacher training. So right now, typically the beginnings and the end of the year are teacher training kind of season, if you will. And so, I'm teaching 200-hour teacher training at my local studio, leading that with another woman, the studio manager, and then co-leading a 300-hour later this year at another studio.
Wow. Amazing. So it seems like you do teach weekly classes. Is it once a week, or do you have more than one week?
I teach once a week, and they're wanting me to teach a philosophy and kind of asana class, and I'm kind of just trying to sit with it and see if it feels schedule wise available. So I love the idea of it, and I think we need more of that, right? More integrative practices.
Yeah. Sounds really exciting. You are teaching weekly classes. You're part of 200 and 300 hours program around your area. And then you are also full-time employed. There's a remote position working for this continuing education yoga platform. Sounds like you have a really nice balance of everything in your full-time yoga teaching career. And what does your typical week would look like as a full-time yoga teacher, and also being a mom?
A typical week is not typical. I'll say that. Yeah, I think, I'm afforded the opportunity to wake up with my kids, or my husband wakes up with my kids, and I get to sleep in sometimes. And we make our kids breakfast, and then they go to camp or to school. And then I, will work on things for my full-time gig. And really what's cool about that too is that it's a remote job. So people are all over the world. Like the professor that I work with is in Switzerland. Some of the other folks are in the Bay Area or in Canada on the East Coast. So my day is pretty varied, right? Because sometimes I'm waking up early to, communicate with people on a different time schedule or time zone. And then, maybe the mid part of my day, I get a little bit of a break, or I'm always a student. So I'm either taking classes on our platform at Arihanta Institute or yogic studies or just SOAS, the Center of Yoga Studies. All of these platforms have so much, so many amazing teachers, right? That are constantly providing wisdom. So I'm just like, now that I have a little bit more time to myself, my kids are 2 years old now. I'm just trying to get back into the swing of continuing education, because that's just, I'm always going to be studying. So I'll do some of that. And then I try and have a home practice or sadhana on a regular daily basis. And sometimes that's a 5-minute meditation. Sometimes that's a full, hour-long practice at a studio. Sometimes it's just a walk in nature. So some time to myself to contemplate and to focus on my breath and awareness. And then, I teach a regular class on Wednesday mornings. And then weekends right now are teacher training, pretty much Saturday and Sunday, and maybe even Friday nights. So that keeps me busy.
I love that you are part of different teacher trainings, and what you share is very much necessary and valuable, so I'm so happy that there are many teacher trainings that you are part of. And I hope the studios you work for and the students that you get to teach, I hope they can tell, they can feel that what an amazing teacher that they have. So what aspects of being a full-time yoga teacher do you love the most, and what do you find it most challenging?
What I love the most is actually what you just said. Like every time, no matter 200 hour, 300 hour, me just going in for 5 hours or me teaching, the bulk of the training, it's the community, it's the conversations, it's the inquisitive, creative thinking. I learn something every time I teach, especially when we get to have conversation, and it lights me up, right? Talking about this and seeing other people get the reasons why, certain things have transitioned into a certain way, and understanding the ways of practicing yoga are multifaceted. And that, to me, that community building, that conversation, those aha moments, those make it all worthwhile, and they're really fun. I also like the learning aspect, to be a constant student and to continue to update my material and, have new examples or new research to talk about. That's what really makes me happy and passionate about my job. Yeah. Hard parts about it are, I still feel like the industry is very much focused on physical asana, and therefore many of the other aspects of yoga are secondary, if not tertiary. And therefore, I've been teaching in trainings, and they're kind of like, because we've kind of gone outside of the pandemic and the memory of George Floyd and Me Too have kind of faded, I would say that I've taught in several trainings where slowly they kind of phased out this aspect of the teaching. And I'm not saying that there couldn't have been other reasons, but I think some people don't necessarily see the value in it, because, I think it's important that because of all the effort that I've put in to learn and to keep learning, that I'm compensated appropriately. And some people don't necessarily understand what that means. Like, you're not just paying for the 5 hours that I'm there teaching this 200-hour or 300-hour training. You're paying for the years of knowledge and education that I've, gone deep into and paid out of sweat, equity, and, money and time. Right. So I think a lot of 200-hour trainings can be kind of like asana factories, and they're just trying to kind of pump, teachers out because it makes the studio a significant amount of money, sometimes the most money, right? It's oftentimes studios are there to have trainings, not to teach daily classes necessarily, because that doesn't necessarily make you enough to pay the rent as a studio owner. So there's that. But on the flip side, going back to it, every time I do a yoga social change lecture or have the conversation about how race, ethnicity, ability all play into yoga in our modern landscape, and how we as teachers, as leaders, as stewards of this practice, it's up to us to really perpetuate these changes and to reinforce those changes within this structure. Every time I talk about that and somebody comes up to me after class and they're like, thank you so much for this conversation. It's one that we're not having elsewhere, or I'm not hearing about till now, or I didn't know these things and I've been practicing for so long. Like that to me tells me like, yes, you are doing the work. You are doing exactly what needs to be done, because sometimes it can be discouraging when people are like, like, I just want to do a handstand. Like, I don't want to talk about this boring stuff, but in those times, I try to remind myself that, there's always more work to be done. There's always more people to reach who it's the people that don't want to hear it that need to hear it the most. Right. So
yeah,
I talk about a lot of the non love and light aspects of yoga, right? Through its history and in modern times, especially.
I think the work you're doing is so important, and it makes, what's the word? It makes me feel good to know that you're out there doing this work. It
Thanks,
makes
Reika.
me feel so great that there's somebody like you out there. And there's more teachers like you doing it, but probably not enough yet. We need more teachers doing the work that you're doing and really bringing what used to be unconscious to conscious for a lot of the practitioners these days. And we, like somebody coming up to you saying, thank you for talking about this. Thank you for bringing this discussion on. I think it's so necessary, especially in teacher training, because there isn't these important discussions happening in teacher training. So it makes me feel so good that somebody like you are out there doing this work. And it's very inspiring to see. And I'm very grateful that I know you and I have you as a friend. And I think it's so interesting for the listeners to hear how different everyone's full-time yoga teacher path is. For you, you teach only one group classes, and then rest is working full-time for this company, this platform, continuing education platform, as well as teaching lots of teacher trainings. And I think it's so beneficial for other teachers to hear that there's this path too. It's not all about teaching group classes at studio, or it's not all about teaching private yoga all the time. So I think it's so great that we get to share your story and your path. Do you have any tips or maybe advices that you would like to give to a newer teacher, some maybe teacher who just became a teacher or who is thinking about maybe pursuing becoming a full-time yoga teacher? Do you have any advice to give?
Yeah. And thank you for all that. First of all, I appreciate hearing that, because there are times when I'm like, do I need to teach more studio classes? Like, what am I, because people will ask all the time, right? Like, how many classes do you teach, or, or what else are you doing? And I'm like, well, I don't, I'm at a full capacity right now. So, even taking on one more class is a big decision for me. And I do enjoy teaching those classes, but I really enjoy being able to go in depth with people over time. So that's why I do love the teacher trainings. One big piece of advice that I tell all teacher training cohorts that I encounter and study with and communicate with is just that, what you said. Being a yoga teacher doesn't have to look like teaching a studio class and having 15 classes that you run around the county teaching. That is one way, right? That is one way, and many people are successful at that. But there are so many opportunities and so many places that are now asking for yoga to be taught. There are places where yoga needs to be taught and isn't being currently. There's also this idea that who we come into the teacher training or, into what we do before that matters, right? There are so many people that are nurses or psychologists or, managers, caretakers, like people in education that come to yoga expecting to be a yoga teacher and teach classes, but really the question is, how are you taking what you're learning and bringing it back into, those other aspects of your life? Yoga, again, isn't just a thing you do. It's a lifestyle, right? So for me, living your yoga practice is recognizing those other areas of incorporation, how you treat others. Maybe it's as a educator, you're bringing meditative or breath consciousness into your classroom. Maybe you're bringing movement into your classroom, or if you're a caretaker to your clients in all stages of life, right? Whether they're at whatever stage of life, whether whatever ability they're at in their life at that moment. So to me, it's recognizing, and that's why I love that you have this podcast and that you invited me on, because there are so many ways to be a full-time yoga teacher. And I think society puts us in this little box and it says you have to, teach classes in a studio and you have to wear spandex and you have to, but there's so many different opportunities. And I'm truly grateful that I found like the other means of educating myself in the ways of yoga so that I can follow my heart, my passion, my dharma, and teach in the way that is meaningful to me or that feels truth to me, right?
Beautifully said, that there's many paths, many way, and eventually I hope all of us can find what feels like this is your dharma, like you said, this way or this path, this teaching style or this classes that I teach or whatever method you teach is resonating with you. And there's just so many paths to choose from. So another question I have is, what does success mean to you as a full-time yoga teacher?
That's a really good question. I'm sure everybody says that when you ask them. Success to me is the ability to help ease suffering. And that could be in my students. It could be in myself. It could be in my family, my children. To me, that is what this technology of yoga is all about. It's a means to alleviate our lived suffering. And I talk about this a lot in terms of, yes, we could all be working towards liberation of some sort, but this yoga practices and traditions are also meant to help us in our lived world, this gross material body that we have. And many of us are suffering, and sometimes we don't even recognize it, right? It could be physical suffering, mental suffering, emotional, global, communal, right? And so what I truly feel is that, first off, many of us come to yoga to heal, to repair, to find. It's like an individual journey, right? And a lot of us, myself included, have alleviated much of that suffering just by following these principles and traditions. Now it's imperative for me, and I think for all of us as teachers, leaders, and stewards of this contemporary yoga practice, to provide that same opportunity for our community, for the people that most importantly are intimately surrounding us, but then beyond that, right? So it's important that we're healing on an individual basis, but also taking the practice outward. I think it's, imperative. That to me is part of the yogic path is, yes, help yourself, but also help others. All of our lives are intertwined, and our liberation is dependent on each other. And without, I think Audre Lorde, Martin Luther King, Gandhi have all said, if we are not all free, then none of us are free. Mm-hmm. And so to me, that's like super important to think and embody.
I love that. That's a very deep and profound way to the answer to that question. What does success mean to you as a full-time teacher? Thank you. Thank you. That's very thoughtful. The last question I have is, where do you see your teaching going in future? Like where do you see your teaching heading?
Where do I see my teaching heading? I think I want to continue to learn myself, and ultimately, I would love to do a PhD program that is focused on the yoga tradition in some way, shape, or form. And even if I'm 60, that's something that I want to do for myself and to keep my mind alive and to learn more. I would love to teach at a university, teach youth, because typically who are in university classes are youthful people of all ages, right? But typically it's, younger adults who are trying to find a way in their life. And I always think if I had high school yoga, how much better off I would be. And even the last cohort I taught in teacher training, somebody was coming straight out of high school because they had high school yoga and they wanted to be a teacher. And I was like, oh my goodness, like how amazing is that, right? And, I did teach at LMU. I taught one of the introduction to yoga courses, for I think it was 1 or 2 semesters. And there is so much transformation that happens. I'm sure you see this as well, as like, you don't feel like you don't know if you're connecting or what you're saying is resonating. But then we would have journal exercises and they would just let go and say like what we learned today was life changing, and learning about ahimsa or satya or even, any of the principles of yoga or the talks that we would have where they were applying them in their lived lives, like makes a difference. And so to me, I think people of all ages finding access to yoga is important, but I definitely think there's this special time in our lives as young adults that we can go many directions. And if we have something to rudder us, like a yoga practice or tradition, we might have better outcomes as a society, as a culture, as a country. And it makes me think that, we can make change on a grander scale if more people are recognizing that nonviolence and living and voicing your truth and taking pride in your surroundings, like all of these very basic principles that yoga touts, right? Many lineages or traditions of yoga tout, and even Jainism and Buddhism and many of the Dharmic traditions, their focus. And even if you think about even wider, many religions in general are spiritualities, right? Coming back to these core principles, not necessarily as a dogmatic means of, of worship or, going to church or community center, but more in application and engagement. How do we live out these principles in our daily life? And to me, that's where I see my future continuing, right? Is making change at a very grassroots level. I'm not a person that's necessarily intending to be famous or celebrity or any of those things. Like I like to know people intimately and make change incrementally. So long story short.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Your journey and your experience and even your advice that you have given to the listeners. I'm sure a lot of people are nodding and resonating with a lot of what you shared today. So I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing your experience and your journey of being a full-time yoga teacher. And is there, share with us how people can find you if they want to reach out to you, any upcoming offering you want to share, or website, social media, anything that you want to share here.
Well, thank you so much, Reika. I want to just give you some love for starting this podcast. I think it's amazing. And the work you're doing is very inspiring too. Like, I'm like, I want to learn more about the body and body mechanics and all of that. And so those are part of my inspiration as well. People can find me at my website, helloholanamaste.com, kind of bringing in my 3 languages and backgrounds. And I'm on Instagram at Taina Berardi. And upcoming, lots of teacher trainings. People keep asking me to do online courses. So that's something in the back of my head. But, I work with arihantainstitute.org, so you can always check out their offerings. We have really accessible classes. My professor is one of my inspirations, Dr. Chris Miller. He teaches some amazing classes about engaged Jainism, but also yoga studies on the platform. And each class is like $99, so it's very inexpensive. So yeah, I am just trying to be a student and taking as much information as I can while also being in community.
Well, thank you, Taina, so much. Thank you for your time. And I cannot wait to share this conversation with everyone. So thank you.
Take care.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Taina. As you can hear in her voice how passionate she is about the work and the knowledge and education that she shares in the yoga world, as well as her commitment to reducing and easing suffering in the world. I just really enjoyed speaking to her, and she's just such an amazing resources to have if you are ever wanting to learn deeper about some of the topic that she mentioned in this interview. Like I said earlier, if you are interested in joining us on the webinar, I might be inviting her back to teach another webinar on history of yoga and kind of looking at the history of yoga and from a critical lens, as well as some of the history of how yoga came to the West. And I also would love to learn more about yoga community's involvement during the time of British colonization. So those are the topics that I'm kind of curious in learning deeper about. If you are too, feel free to message me, let me know, so I know that you are interested. So we can invite her back on to teach another webinar on my online studio. So let me know if you're interested, as well as if you have any questions, suggestions, or any episodes that you really enjoy that resonated with you. I love hearing from you, so you are always welcome to message me on Instagram. My handle is @ReikaYoga, and my website is www.reikayoga.com. I also love taking requests or suggestions on who I should interview. So if you know somebody, if you know a great full-time yoga teacher, or if you are a yoga teacher, full-time yoga teacher who would like to be interviewed, don't be shy and reach out to me. I would love to share everyone's unique journey and story of being a full-time yoga teacher. So that's it for now. I'll give you more updates on my Peru experience and my teacher training experience in the next week's episode. I will speak to you soon. Bye.